Hello everyone, we're just about to get started. For everyone's information, this is going to be a live stream today, so anything can happen. Be prepared for anything. I'm gonna have a couple of live demos, so we'll see kind of how everything works out and if I remember all of the procedures by heart. Um, but I'm gonna give this one more minute before we start. And please let me know in the chat if the sound is okay and that my chat is actually working on my secondary monitor here so I can see your questions. Feel free to ask any questions during this session and I'll try to answer as much as I can, especially towards the end. I will be having an Ask Me Anything session. Okay, perfect. Thank you all for verifying that my sound is okay. Appreciate that. So, one thing that I wanted to do in 0.3 was to start to focus on Gemini. And Gemini is kind of the program that is between Mercury and Apollo, where quite a lot of players are struggling in re-entry. So if I look at kind of the statistics for re-entry, we see that when it comes to achievements, a lot of people have Mercury achievements, but when it comes to Gemini, it's less, and then Apollo is very, very few, a fraction, basically. So what I wanted to do with this update is to fix some of the major pain points when it comes to Gemini. And I'm going to go through some of the procedures that has changed, but hopefully things will be a little bit simpler for you when you're playing kind of the Academy and the campaign. The second thing that I wanted to quickly mention before we start today is that, and as I said earlier, this is a live stream, so I've been preparing a couple of demos, but please stay with me if I need to figure something out or if something is going wrong. So, all right. The first thing that I want to do is to load up into Gemini. So I'm just launching reentry here and stepping into the loading screen. So let me know on the stream and also paying attention to it to see when the monitor has changed on the scene view.
Mark, 50 seconds. You're looking good, 8.
Okay, perfect. Everything seems to be in order. This is a new setup for me, doing this through YouTube, and I've set up a new computer with the OBS and everything. So let me know if anything is kind of weird. So, first of all, I'm now loaded into Gemini. And Gemini might be very familiar to some of you, and if not, I'll go through some of the basics as well during the stream. But the first thing that I want to do is to go ahead and enable my OMS. That's basically the system that allows me to change my attitude in orbit. And then I'm going to set the platform to blunt and forward, which basically means that I'm going to have my heat shield in the direction I'm traveling. So basically a retrograde orientation. So now if I look out through the window, you can see that I'm kind of looking backwards. So the next thing that I want to do is to showcase the first feature that I've been working on for 0.93. And that's one of the major features, but the one feature that you don't really kind of see. It's kind of an invisible feature. But if I now go into Gemini again, and I'll disable my OMS, make sure that I also kill most of my rates. And I might as well just go heads up orientation as well. And this feature that I'm about to show will affect every single spacecraft in re-entry, not only Gemini. Okay, so now I'm in rate command. I'll go back to platform and set my maneuvering systems to off. This basically disables everything, so there's no jets that are able to correct or change my attitude. And now I'm going to start to timescale quite a lot. And please pay attention to the attitude indicator here. And I'm going to keep it at like 200, which should be more than enough to kind of show what I wanted to show. This is from external view. On the night side. And look at my orientation relative to Earth. It's very stable. So I've been changing the entire logic that which is the gravity model of re-entry, so that kind of orbiting bodies around planet Earth or the moon is much more stable. So the key things that this will affect is that one, your reaction control systems and fuel supplies won't be depleted as fast, because they just don't need to constantly get you into the correct attitude again. One of the issues that you would have struggled with before is that if you're time scaling, your spacecraft will basically start to rotate way too fast than it would in real life. So now that's all fixed, and it's a lot better to be playing around this game. One of the key areas that this feature will be improving is for any situation where you're docking. So if you're docking with a Gina, for example, or another Gemini, or the lunar module for extracting it from the launch vehicle, or rendezvousing with the lunar module again, rendezvousing the lunar module with the command service module again after a lunar ascent, those invisible angular rotations should be much more stable, so you can have a better docking experience. Okay, so that's the first feature. What I'm going to do now is to step into the capsule again. So first of all, I'm now in orbit around Earth, and my orbit is 120.5, so 120.5 nautical miles of altitude, and my perigee is 84.2 nautical miles of altitude. And one thing that you might notice, this is just a minor, I've added a little equator plane. I don't know exactly what texture I want to do it to have on it yet, but I'll figure something out. But what I wanted to show now was that if I now go into the Gemini spacecraft, one of the biggest pain points that most players have been having is to use the computer. So basically this part here, and reading those IVIs when doing circulation burns. It will jump around, suddenly it would be something else, it would reset, and everything was just in general very unstable and buggy. So I took everything out and I reprogrammed quite a lot of how the onboard computer works and how it interacts with the IVIs, and of course it's a display here, the MDU. So to showcase this, I'm going to show you another feature. These circular buttons are slowly going to kind of move into the mission tools here. I left everything still out here, as well as the smaller circular buttons for VR players. But the main goal here is that mission tools is where stuff will kind of get gathered. And I've added simplified burn planner. If you're used to Apollo, then you might have used the burn planner to figure out burns. The key thing with Gemini is that this is kind of the first time you will be planning burns in re-entry. In Mercury, it's not possible to change your orbit, so you won't need to maneuver around and figure out delta V's and stuff like that, with the exception of the retrograde burn. In Gemini, everything changes because you suddenly have access to this new dimension of executing a mission. But most of the burns are either circularization burns at perigee, apogee, or a rendezvous burn. So what I'm going to do now is to go ahead and say that I want to request a circularization burn at AP. Previously, you would need to
Roger, DCS.
jump into the computer now and then start to insert target orbit data and stuff like that, and calculate kilometers to nautical miles. All of that was wrong based on real life. And these new procedures are much more realistic. So the first thing that I will need to do is to make sure that my computer is set to catch up. The catch up program is basically where you're going to perform most of the burns in a Gemini mission. This is basically your burn mode, and it's designed to circulate orbit, maneuver in space, and get all the tools that are required to do so. So right now, since I changed my program, I will need to wait about 10 minutes for the tape to load. So I'm going to just go ahead and do some time scaling until this light extinguishes. There we go. The first thing that I want to do is, let me just verify a couple of things here. I have got the DCS message, which means that there's been an uplink from ground to the computer. And one thing I noticed is that most of you don't, reset this light. So every time you receive a DCS, this light will illuminate. So go ahead and reset that so that you know when you're receiving a new message, or else it will just stay on. Anyways, that's just a minor detail. I've now received a burn, and the burn is going to happen at mission time 3 hours, 23 minutes and 37 seconds into the mission, with a delta V of 65.53 feet per second. Okay, now what does this really mean? It's basically this. If I now open the mission tools again, I've added a blank paper which you can draw on and take notes, stuff like that, and also a catch-up maneuver pad. And this is a very simple pad to kind of introduce you to the concept of pads, which are quite heavily in use in Apollo. So what I'm going to do now is to go ahead and just type down a couple of these data points to show you kind of what this means. So this is an AP circularization burn, and I'm going to be using my RCS together with my OBC, and the OBC is the onboard computer. Now, the first piece of data here is going to be my mission time, and that's kind of divided into two rows. Getty, and that's 00323. So I'm going to just type 0, 0, 3, and then 23. And that's basically hours and minutes of when ignition should happen. Okay, it's out of view. Okay, let me just do one thing here. It seems, let me go ahead and change my display settings. There we go. And then I'll just basically restart the mission. Thank you for letting me know. And hopefully I'll get back to... Yeah, Okay, it seems like the resolution is now fixed. Yeah, it was cut at 1080 and my screen was a little bit wider.
Mark, 50 seconds, you're looking good, 8.
So let me just load up into the mission real quick. And I will be creating short video tutorials on all of these concepts in addition to a couple of other ones over the next few days, so that you can get the details if you need that. So I'm going to go ahead and wait for my panels to load. And go sharp and forward this time. And then let me check the pad view. Okay. Now let's just verify that everything is okay when it comes to the resolution. Perfect. Okay, so let me just request that set this first computer to catch up. Let's timescale for the catch-up module to load from the tape. This is a tape playing in the background, which basically loads the data into the computer, which is why it's so slow. And then I can go ahead and request an AP circularization burn.
Roger, DCS.
Okay, so once again, this is AP circularization, and I'm going to be using the RCS OBC. And the next data was basically the time of ignition. So now it's a different time than in the previous one because I've showcased the stable orbit physics. And now it's going to be at 27 minutes into the mission. So that's hours and then minutes. And the next piece of data is 01949, and it will always start with a 0. And then next is 1949. So which basically means the seconds and kind of the milliseconds into the mission. So we're at going to have an ignition at 0 hours, 27 minutes, and 19 seconds into the mission. And the mission timer has now been fixed. Previously, after 24 hours, it would reset back to 0. So that's also a bug fix that I've corrected in this build. And now we are going to wait for this timestamp here. So notice that my computer is not running. Previously, it had to be running for us to do anything. The next piece of data is the delta V, and that's 00655. So I'm going to type that in, 0, 0, and then 65.5. So that's basically my delta V. It's 65.5, and the rest are just going to be 0. And this is all the information that the onboard computer needs. Everything else is just some details. So for example, BT is burn time. It's going to be a 32-second long burn. And it's, we don't care about attitude. I'll show you why pretty soon. And then 120, which is the circular orbit. So the same on both. That's basically the pad, and this is the first time you will get introduced to pads in the game if you're following kind of the sequence that I've designed. So with that said, how do we actually plan this burn into the computer? It's actually quite simple. So first of all, notice that the burn planner sent me a DCS. So if I now go into 01 and I hit read out, it should already be the same as the first row here. And notice that on the pad there are core values here. So 01, that's the first memory address with its 5 digits. And if I now hit clear and I read out 02, you can see that the same value is there as well. You could type this data in directly manually without caring about the DCS if you wanted to, of course. And then we had 25, which is 65.5. That's correct. Now the other ones are all zeros. You might have noticed that there was a 9 in front of them. That basically just means a minus. So the first digit can either be a 0 or a 9. And 0 is plus and 9 is minus. And minus 0, 0 is just fractions. So I will need to figure out a way to just round that off. But for now, just if it's a 9 first and then the rest is zeros, then just don't care about it. Okay, so with that set, all of my parameters should be okay. 25 was there, 26, 0, 27, 0. So that's all it takes. I've inserted a time of ignition and the delta V, and if I now hit start on the computer, you will notice that the burn is suddenly starting to calculate. And I can basically close this one down, and you can see that on the IVIs, we have some digits here. To complete the burn, all I need to do is to zero out the IVIs at the time of ignition. Now, if I now go into the computer again, there's an address called 83, and that's the countdown towards the burn. And this is minutes, 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 seconds, seconds. So we're basically 3 minutes and 48, 47, 46 seconds away from the burn itself. So before it used to be seconds in total, now it's minutes and seconds. So it's a little bit easier to read and understand. So with that said, I'm going to show you the next little thing related to burns. And that's the direction to perform the burn in. So I'm going to make sure that my OMS is enabled, and I'm going to go into rate command. And notice that if I change my orientation, the IVIs will also start to change. And this is because it's a closed loop function running on the computer. And then the IVIs will automatically transform the burn vector that you've set with local vertical using 25, 26, and 27 into its local body direction based on your attitude. So it's of course very simple to perform a burn is if you can kind of align your attitude so that it will most of the burn will happen in one axis. But now I will timescale a little bit to get closer to the burn. And usually you would set on an event timer for this, so you don't need to kind of spam read out. But for simplicity and the effort of the time, I'll just keep it simple. So we're 20 seconds away. And I'll fix this one because of, this one is a stable vector while I'm orbiting Earth, so I'm having like a 4 degrees rotation. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, burn. And pay attention to my orbit data as well as I go along. And this was about 32 seconds long burn. There we go. We have now zeroed the IVIs, and we're now in a circular orbit. And the key difference here is that now if you want to perform a rendezvous burn, you will request a rendezvous burn. And I'm not going to execute that. But it's basically exactly the same. You do the same procedure when it comes to the burn itself. You use a computer, you verify the data, and you perform the burn. But it's always important to hit reset After one burn, so I've just completed my circularization burn, then hit reset to turn everything up. And then since the parameter has changed, you will need to press start again to recalculate the initial logic and to enable this IVIs. All of these procedures are available in the checklists. So you have circularization orbit and how to set that up. And you have rendezvous, which is basically what you used to, but with these change logics. So a rendezvous burn consists of two burns. One is the rendezvous burn, and then you have the circularization burn at AP. So all of these checklists have been updated and is currently runnable. One last feature that I wanted to show you when it comes to burns is plane change. So this is the first time I've added plane change into the simulation. So I'll go ahead and go to my map view, and you can see that my orbit is currently at an inclination of 28.908. So then I can go into mission tools, and I want to say that I want to plan a burn that inserts me into 29.1, for example. And I can go ahead and request the plane change. And notice the large amount of delta V required to change this burn. And notice that on the pad we have an ignition time, but this time all the velocity is happening in the y direction, which is basically up and down. And then we have the burn time and everything else. So in order to perform a plane change burn, let's take a look at the map view here. We are going to perform a burn next to either the descending node or the ascending node. And those are the nodes where your orbital trajectory crosses equator. And it's basically the only point in the orbit which share kind of the same axis. So one of the important things here is that if you're performing inclination, everything will happen at the node, but there's a slight other difference between those, and that's the altitude of the point of the node. So basically apogee, perigee is around, and there's going to be some slight differences. So the logic internally will decide which node will require the least delta V to perform the plane change. All that's left is to, after requesting the burn, I'll need to verify the data. I know that everything should be correct, so I'm going to hit start, and I will be able to just orientate the spacecraft to perform the burn. And this one, this time it will of course be in the kind of upwards and downwards direction with respect of this spacecraft, and then of course. But I'm just going to do that now. I'm going to hit the next little feature that I planned for you today, and that is back on the main menu. I'm going to, first of all, I mentioned that I have added a new maneuvering lesson that will cover the pads in detail. And it will also make you go through executing a circular orbit together with Patrick as your instructor. Okay, and the last big feature of this update is also in Project Gemini. So I'm going to relaunch this mission, and this last demo is going to be a very kind of probably the fastest paced procedure that I have been doing in a good while. So just bear with me. It's not going to follow the realistic procedures, but I've created a video where I'm going through everything in detail, including in updating the Academy lesson, and that's re-entry. So the second big pain people have been having in re-entry, in addition to, you know, all the fiddling with the OBC, is getting back to Earth. And with the updates on 092, where I've did quite a lot on Apollo, I've kind of applied some of the similar logic to Gemini as well. So what I'm going to do now is to, first of all, align my spacecraft with the blunt end forward. And as I mentioned, it's going to be a very high-paced, off-the-script procedure. So I'll just hit everything that I know I'm going to be needing on in the interest of time. And there we go. And then I'll go to rate command, and I'll go into heads up orientation. Perfect. And then I'll change the program into the re-entry module. And this is also one of the big updates in 0.93, and that's the overhaul of the re-entry module inside of the OBC. So the OBC has been receiving a lot of updates, as you saw in the previous demo as well. So now I'm going to wait those minutes. So I'm just going to timescale. There we go. And I'm going to manually fire those retrograde engines to get back to Earth. This is all about entry, so I'll go ahead and trigger everything. Electrical, adapter is gone. And then I will be starting the computer. So I'm in re-entry mode. The computer is now running, as it should before your retrograde ignition. And then I'm going to go ahead and manually fire the retrograde engines. So you can see they are now burning. But the other thing that you might notice is that the IVIs is now counting up. And this is showing me the accumulated delta V vector from the retrograde engines in feet per second. So this is basically my retrograde burn delta V measured. So now you can see that I performed a burn with 310 feet per second in kind of the retrograde aft direction. And we have some right movement that's normal, and same with up and down. And these numbers are quite close to those numbers that you see on the mission transcripts from Gemini retrograde burn as well. So I'm going to go ahead and jettison the retrograde engines, and I should now be all alone with my re-entry module. So then I'm going to switch my attitude control mode to rate command in the re-entry section. I'm going to make sure that everything works. So you can see that the jets are now firing. And I'm going to get into the center of the flight director indicator. There we go. And right now I'm sitting here heads up with the blunt end forward. And as with Apollo, the Gemini spacecraft also got a lift vector. And it got an offset of the center of gravity, but it's inverted from Apollo, which means that heads up will generate the lift vector upwards as well, and heads down will generate a lift vector that goes down. So if I now go back into the Gemini spacecraft, I'll use timescale to quickly timescale towards entry interface. And if I now take a look at my orbit view here, and I'll also change the sun position to better kind of highlight my trajectory here, you can see that my retrograde burn will take me into across the southern part of Africa and all the way towards this blue circle here, which is the predicted splashdown point. And that's also a new feature. It now got the same rendering system that I have in Apollo for predicting where you will splash down. So now everything that's left to do is to perform the re-entry itself. And I will continue my timescale to about entry interface. That's 400,000 feet of altitude. And I also send you the message that, okay, we're across the entry interface. And now we should get prepared for re-entry. And one of the first things that you might notice is that the Avia is showing a high number in the first section here, the forward and aft. So this is nautical miles left until the predicted splashdown point. So I can use this value combined with the g-forces, combined with this descent meter and the altitude to safely land the spacecraft back on Earth. So I'm still in BF. I could do this in free as well. And I'm in rate command. I'm going to switch to re-ent pretty soon, just to have some higher rates. And then I will change this one to at, not that it matters that much. And I'll slightly shift my orientation a little bit. And now you can see that the spacecraft is detecting some drag already, which will automatically position it into an aerodynamic attitude. And since I'm heads up, you can see that I have a slight tilt on the heat shield relative to my lift vector. So the lift will be generated based on that. So I can use roll to just open a blank piece of paper. I can then use roll to command what direction my lift vector is. So currently, if this is Earth and this is the capsule, then and this is the direction of kind of flight or the way that the air hits the heat shield, you will see that it will kind of blow down here and produce a lift vector upwards. And this is in the heads up direction. Okay, so I'm going to now focus on the entry aspect, and this is where everything will go quite fast. You can see that my g-forces is now climbing up towards 0.5. Since I'm having heads up, I will not dive into the atmosphere initially. I want to travel a little bit further down range before diving into it, and I'll hit the re-ent mode just to have some quick reactions. 1G. And I'll roll down at about 300 nautical miles ahead of... I've also removed some of the sound effects and added another one similar to the one in Apollo. And I've also been changing quite a lot of the logic itself when it comes to how these things are working, not only the procedures. Okay, I'm now going to roll and dive into the atmosphere. And this is where you need to pay attention to the g-forces. I'm going to switch back to... Oh, I'll just... Okay, my G's are building up. I can hear that bass sound effects coming in. My range is still going quite fast, so I will probably miss my target. We'll see. 4 G's, and to be safe, I will now rotate the craft and reverse the lift vector to avoid the g-forces to build up too fast. So now 6, 7 G's. My lift vector is going up, so I will eventually make this constant. And if I would then bank a little bit, the lift vector would be reduced. Thus I could kind of make this constant if I wanted to brake as fast as possible. But I don't want to bring this up too much, so I'll just try to focus on getting down as fast as possible right now. 5. I can dive into the atmosphere again. My G's are building. Okay, that's a lot. Let's get down. Lift vector is now pointing up. And you can see that I'm now starting to get back to Earth. The next thing that we need to make sure is that our landing system needs to be armed for our chutes to work. Okay. $50,000. 40,000. We should get the main chutes, the drogues. Drogues are out. And we should see the decrease in yeah, perfect. And we landed about 30 nautical miles off target, which is a pretty good value in my opinion. I will not yet, at least, I've not yet enabled the game over. If you would exceed high Gs, like 11, 12 Gs, then in Apollo you will get a game over. You will explode. And unless you turn off the settings on main menu. I've not yet enabled that for Gemini, just because I want to make sure that this is well enough tested before I start to break you up. The next part is, I should probably turn off this. The next part is that I've now added a new achievement for performing these kinds of entries in Apollo. So in Apollo, if you're able to re-enter through the atmosphere with a splashdown on Earth without hitting that maximum G's threshold, you will get a new achievement, which is the atmospheric entry achievement. And I plan on maybe creating one for Gemini. Please let me know if you want that or not. Gemini is quite a lot simpler in entry, but it's still kind of the same concepts, and it will introduce you to a lot of the things that are quite big in Apollo. Everything in Apollo is quite a lot bigger and more complex than in Gemini, even though Gemini is still quite a complex spacecraft. But yeah, I should. I've actually been planning on having a way for people to load like PNGs or something from their hard drive and tape photos of stuff like your cat or your dog on different places inside of the cockpit, or maybe some of the diagrams or stuff like that if you want. Okay, so we're now at 2 and falling. So yeah, that's the main features of 0.93. To quickly sum up, you saw that the gravity physics have been improved quite a lot when it comes to the attitude. You're now able to maintain the correct attitude, the natural attitude in orbit, even in high timescales. And then I've added some big updates to Gemini when it comes to the onboard computer. You saw that the catch-up routine and the re-entry routine has been completely revamped, and it's now much better to use and also very much more realistic than it used to be. And then I've gone through and updated entire entry procedures and logic for Gemini. The re-entry itself, the procedures in the checklist, have not changed much. It's still kind of similar. So you just follow the pre-retro everything here as you used to. So the only thing that you will need to care about is that roll. And then there's some changes in what data you see on the IVIs. And then Lastly, there's some small things. I've added hotkeys for each of the pads. You can toggle them. I've also been going through quite a lot of bugs. You will find the list of that in the release notes. And I'm planning on publishing 0.93 this evening, so I will put the bits live. This is because one of the critical issues in 0.92 is that some switches in Apollo has been made invisible. You're basically not able to complete a TLI burn, for example, because the switch to enable TLI is suddenly invisible. So there's a couple of those critical issues that I wanted to roll out as soon as possible. The next thing is that I'm going to keep 0.93 out in the public. Please go ahead and do some testing and give me feedback on these things, and I will kind of roll out hotfixes on those issues when it comes to those new bits that you saw today. So with that, I'm going to load up into Orbit, and I'm going to let's go into Gemini because this is mainly about Gemini today. And I'll be happy to answer any of your questions. So please be sure to ask me anything on the chat, and I'll be happy to answer. So let's see. I think that there was some comments here. The mission control module for reentry is mostly a multiplayer thing, and the issues here is running everything at once. So if I would kind of simulate an Apollo, I would need to or kind of let players control an Apollo capsule from ground. Just to kind of take a look at the data, you would still need to kind of run through all of the logic and the physics and everything related to that to make that work. So there are some very big complexities on making Moker offline. The only thing that could work would be to play back kind of recorded data and make sure that you see that data and react accordingly as kind of tests or something like that to kind of introduce you to the flow of data and take a look at how everything works. But when it comes to playing both at the same time, it's going to be a big requirement in terms of hardware. I do not have co-op in re-entry yet. I've only having the Mercury Control Center and the Apollo Mission Control Room, MOCR, as an alpha testing. So multiplayer modes are planned for post 1.0. So there's something that's going to be between 1.0 and 2.0. But I do have Mercury Control Center and the MOCR modules out in a technical preview, basically alpha testing, where I'm trying to learn how the network logic works. Just to, not start with that after 1.0. I wanted to kind of get the ball rolling and start to get the network, the core network logic all written out. So I've been running these on the side, but I've been learning quite a lot from them. So I have a few ways of figuring out how we could perform a multi-crewed cockpit multiplayer mode. So that's something that I do have on my roadmap with a question mark behind it. That's something that I wish to do. I've heard feedback from you guys for years that you want to have multiplayer in the cockpits. So it's a high priority item after I release kind of the core. And the core of reentry will be 1.0. That's just the foundation, a fundament to continue developing the project on. So 1.0 it will kind of be the removal of the early access flag, but it doesn't mean that the game is finished. A game like this will never kind of be finished. These spacecrafts are so complex and there's so much thing to learn for me and logic to write. So it's kind of an infinite project. So the only thing that I can do is to try and evolve this closer and closer to how the crafts worked in real life and try to kind of make a game out of it. The Gemini is able to get quite high in orbit. So the question is kind of how high can Gemini get? The Gemini spacecraft got kind of a weak translation control system. It's the RCS basically, so it takes time to burn. You saw that raising the orbits from around 80 to 120 took like 30-40 seconds. But one thing that Gemini can do is to dock with Agena, and Agena can be configured using the encoder and send them some codes to enable the engine on Agena to take you further up. So Agena can take you very far out in orbit. If there's any plans for Russian vehicles in the future. Yes, I've been playing quite a lot around with Russian vehicles. The biggest issue I have with these vehicles is that I do not know enough about the licensing, so the rights to use this and to recreate them and at what level. So that's kind of the biggest pain I'm having with the Russian vehicles right now. The second one is that they're quite complex when it comes to documentation and availability and information to create a simulation. So one of the first crafts that I want to do for the Russian crafts, and there's a YouTube video where I'm playing the Vostok spacecraft, which should be about an hour and a half long on my channel, so you can go and check it out and check how Vostok looks in reentry. Of course, it's not released yet, but that's something I want to do. That's also a post 1.0 feature. So currently 0.9 is mostly stuff like this, getting the old stuff to work a little bit better. It's not a system complete implementation in Mercury, Gemini, or Apollo, but it's a fundamental kind of milestone, and the milestone is that I want to be able to play some missions to rendezvous with Agena and land on the moon and get back. That's kind of the 1.0 features, and there's a lot of new features that could be added, new systems and fuel cell improvements and stuff like that. But yeah, please go ahead and check out the Vostok video if you're curious about yeah, just call Vostok. Vostok is copyright free. Yeah, anyways, let's see. Any word on having the OBC agency control re-entry in Gemini and Apollo? So yeah, one of the new features that you've seen is this entry model. So now that I have this feature in place, I will go ahead and make a coarse implementation of automatic guidance through the atmosphere. I do not yet know when it will be worked on, if it's going to be before 1.0 or after 1.0. I kind of need to figure out a way to get into 1.0, so I don't know about the scope, but we'll see. It's of course something that I want to have in the game because realistically the computers flew the Apollo command module through the atmosphere. But yeah. For Gemini mission control, I do not yet have any plans for Gemini mission control. I kind of want to see how Mercury, the Mercury Control Center and the Apollo Mission Control Center works first, and what the popularity is, and then we'll kind of see where things evolve. The Gemini mission control room was basically two different rooms. The first room was a similar room to the Mercury Control Center with some changed and added instruments on the tables. And then it evolved into the Moker, which is the one that we see in Apollo. A little bit different, but kind of the same, similar setup. So Gemini had two different mission control rooms. So if I would implement a mission control module for Gemini, it would be one of those two, not both. And secondly, I have other plans for the first multiplayer mode in Gemini. But I won't dive into the details of what that is yet. But I guess you understand. For Moker, there's not too much updates for 93. I've been mainly focused on getting the gravity physics in terms of attitude rotation fixed, and then getting the major pain points that basically been in Gemini for I don't know 5-6 years. So I wanted to get that out of the world. I have been correcting a lot of issues in Mocher in terms of bugs. I've corrected the invisible characters. I've corrected the strange white panel illumination issue that we've been having. But of course, that new tool for working with kind of orbital mechanics for Fido is kind of where my development focus is. But none of those bits are in 0.93, even though, of course, development happens on it. Yeah, maybe eventually. If you know the sim instruments, it's interesting. There's quite a lot to to be done with Apollo. So it would be very sad if I would create kind of a partial implementation of the command module and Luna module as we see now, and just kind of leave it at that. You know, there's quite a lot to do in Apollo. You can, you know, change your orbits, you can test the computer modes, you can plan burns, you can execute burns, you can, you know, go to the moon and orbit it and land on it. There's some optics. There's a lot of stuff and systems to play around with. And you have, you know, rendezvousing with the Luna module, extracting it and stuff like that. But I would like to add more. So if people are investing a lot of time in Apollo and trying to learn to fly Apollo, then it would be nice to also add even more stuff to do in Apollo, so that you know you don't learn all of that and then suddenly there's nothing more to do because you know you conquered Apollo, you landed on the moon basically and got back. There might be an Italian translation. The translation work is done by the community as contributions. We have a GitHub page where translations are happening and where players and volunteers can go ahead and translate whatever they want in whatever language they want, and I'll just work with them and bring that in. So I know that there's some ongoing things. Uh, After the 0.93 update, I'm going to quite quickly merge in some of the typos and some of the language work that has been done over the summer. I haven't been able to look at that yet, and get that up as a patch for you guys pretty soon. But I do want to say that for all of you who are translating and helping me with translation, big thank you. It's a lot of work, and it's great to see the game, you know, in a different language, even though I don't understand everything. EVA for Apollo would also be cool, like in space EVA. That would be a great feature. I've been working on the Gemini EVA. So in Gemini, you're actually able to step out of the craft and perform an EVA if you haven't done so yet. And there's this translation pistol thing that you can use to maneuver around in space. And it's especially fun in VR because it's attached to one of your controllers. But that's kind of the basic logic, and I want to see if it's possible to add that to Apollo. But the big problem with Apollo is, you know, resources and computations, and Apollo is already very heavy to render. Artemis mission, that would be nice. There's a lot of licensing issues with Artemis and all of the different companies that work to make that happen. But everything is contracted through. Yeah, I don't actually know about that, so I don't know. But I know that the licensing is very involved. Yeah, the handrails by moving my hands would be cool. Yes, definitely. yeah, thanks all for tuning in today, and thanks for all your feedback and all your suggestions. In 0.92, there's already a lot of features that have been suggested by you guys. For example, the hotkeys for the pads. And there was also, by the way, a little request on. This is just a minor, and I don't know exactly if I want to keep it there or not. But I've added it into the game as a test. And if I now go up to the polls, you will see some green, nice things. And if you go down to the south, you also see some nice little things. And if I would be in orbit, I could also see them from the cockpit. But that's just a minor little for fun thing because one of you guys wanted it, and I've always had the Northern Light, Aurora Borealis, and Australis in the game before. But suddenly, because of a bug, they just disappeared. So I now fixed it and got it back into the game. But then I also used some different logic to actually render them. Yeah. Anyways, that was just a minor. So with that, once again, thank you all for joining in today. I hope you liked this stream and the 0.93 update. As mentioned, I will roll this out later today, and then I will fix stuff with kind of small patches going forward with this new stuff based on what you guys report. So I do want to say thank you all for helping out testing and reporting issues. I will be available in the Discord and also to answer out questions there as usual. I'm always in the Discord channel. There's a final question here. I have a model of detecting your range to stations, and I have a model to detect the line of sight and loss of signal and acquisition of signal in Apollo when you go behind the moon and stuff like that. I do have all that logic in place. It's just that I have an override to basically disables it. I want to get in Apollo one big update eventually when more Moker takes more shape will be the comms. So the communication systems, antennas, and working with those things. But for now, I will not focus too much on the comms and prioritize the other systems. But it's of course something I want to do. There is a setting on mission level called realistic comms, and that's kind of the groundwork for what I want to do with it. So a mission can say that I want to have realistic comms, and then the mission will kind of decide that, because it would make sense to have realistic comms in the academy, which would make players not able to continue working with the academy if they don't know how to set up the comms and configure the comms and reconfigure the comms as they move around Earth, stuff like that. What inspired you to create this game? That's a good question. I've been a long time kind of flight simmer. I've been playing Flight Simulator, prepared DCS a lot, and I've also been playing Orbiter since the early days. An old guy, so NASP has been a big favorite project of mine, and actually one time I even tried to apply to join the NASP team and contributing, but they had this spam bot that prevented everything from sending messages to them, and that was the only way to reach out to them at that time. So I kind of sent a few messages over the course of a couple of months, but I didn't hear back. So I was playing prepared. No, I was playing prepared with the PMDG, and I was thinking that okay, what alternatives are there for spaceflight? How can I play Mercury and Gemini with these high fidelity cockpits where I can click absolutely everything? And there wasn't too many options, so I decided to go ahead with a weekend project, and then it kind of evolved into this. And I remember I was living in Seattle back then, so then I spent quite a lot of time on the way home going to the library at the University of Washington, checking some books, getting back home, going through a lot of math, calculus, stuff like that in the kitchen, and then spent maybe half a year just studying these things, maybe a year before I started to write the first lines of code. Yeah, it was. NASP has been going through a lot of different phases, and I really like the course they're taking now with the realistic AGC and everything that happens around the use of the VAGC. That's impressive work by the NASP team. Reentry got a little bit different focus, uh, slightly lower fidelity. I want the procedures to be as realistic as possible, and then evolve it towards realistic procedures. But I'm not, for example, modeling a lot of the internal power lines and relays that leads to other relays to kind of trigger a logic. I do have some, but not at NASP level. That's a different game on its own. Yes. Okay. I think that's it. So once again, thank you all for watching, and I hope you like playing Reentry. Keep giving me feedback, keep giving me suggestions, and I'll see you over at Discord and the Steam forums. Bye, everyone.